Imagine standing in a room filled with flashing cameras, the air heavy with tension, and all eyes fixed on you. Now imagine being asked a question so vile, so dripping with condescension, that it slices through the air like a knife. That's exactly what happened to Melania Trump on one fateful day, a moment that would ignite a firestorm of controversy and leave the world stunned. The journalist smirked as he leaned forward, his voice laced with arrogance. "Mrs. Trump," he began, his words cutting like shards of glass. "Do you ever feel embarrassed being nothing more than a trophy wife, someone who stands silently beside her husband while the real work gets done?" The room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves crashing against a rocky shore. The insult hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, as Melania's expression remained unreadable. But behind those calm eyes was a storm brewing, a storm no one could have anticipated. For years, she had endured whispers and sneers, dismissed as merely an accessory to one of the most powerful men in the world. They had underestimated her time and time again, reducing her to nothing more than a caricature of privilege and beauty. But this moment, this was different. This was personal, and what happened next would shake the very foundations of the media world. Melania didn't flinch, didn't falter. Instead, she did something no one expected, something that would leave even her harshest critics speechless. Because when you push someone too far, when you strip them of their dignity in public view, sometimes they push back in ways that are unforgettable. And this time, the journalist wouldn't just regret his words, he'd never recover from them. The journalist's question wasn't just an insult, it was a reflection of a deeper, systemic issue that Melania Trump had faced for years. In the eyes of many, she was always just the model, the immigrant wife, the silent figure standing beside one of the most polarizing men in modern history. Her accomplishments, her intelligence, her resilience, they were often overshadowed by the media's fixation on her appearance and her role as a spouse. It wasn't the first time she had been humiliated publicly, but this moment was a culmination of years of unfair treatment. Treatment that mirrored the struggles faced by countless women who were underestimated and dismissed. Melania's journey into public life had been anything but smooth. As a former model from Slovenia, she had worked hard to build a career before marrying Donald Trump. Yet her past was weaponized against her during his campaigns. Tabloids plastered her nude photos across their covers, reducing her to an object of ridicule and controversy. They labeled her as unfit for the role of First Lady, ignoring her advocacy work and charitable efforts. Even when she launched initiatives like Be Best, aimed at combating cyberbullying and improving children's welfare, critics were quick to dismiss her efforts as hypocritical because of her husband's infamous online behavior. The media didn't stop there. They mocked her accent, scrutinized her every move, and even questioned her marriage. When rumors surfaced about Donald Trump's alleged affairs, Melania became a target for pity rather than respect. She refused to play the role of the obedient wife standing by his side during damage control appearances, a decision that earned both admiration and criticism. Despite being fiercely independent and choosing to navigate these challenges on her own terms, she was often portrayed as cold or detached. But perhaps the most egregious example came when a journalist referred to Melania as a hooker at a public event, a comment so vile that it sparked outrage across social media platforms. Although the reporter later apologized, the damage was done. The remark wasn't just an attack on Melania, it was an attack on every woman who has ever been reduced to baseless stereotypes or judged unfairly based on their past. It highlighted the double standards women face in positions of power or visibility, where their worth is often measured by their appearance or their association with men rather than their own merits. Melania's treatment wasn't unique. It was emblematic of broader societal issues. Women in high-profile roles often face relentless scrutiny and are held to impossible standards. Their achievements are minimized, their mistakes magnified, and their personal lives dissected for public consumption. Melania's story resonated with many who have experienced similar injustices in their own lives. whether it's being overlooked at work, judged for their choices, or dismissed because they don't fit traditional molds. The journalist's question that day wasn't just an insult. It was a reminder of how far society still has to go in recognizing women's worth beyond superficial labels. And while Melania had endured years of this treatment with grace and composure, this moment felt different. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up against the pervasive culture of disrespect and dismissal that so many women face daily. As the tension in the room grew palpable, Melania didn't respond immediately. But behind her silence lay years of frustration, a quiet determination to turn this moment into something more than just another instance of public humiliation. What happened next would be remembered not only as a turning point for Melania Trump, but as a powerful statement against injustice itself. For a fleeting moment, the room seemed frozen in time. The journalist's words hung heavy in the air, their venomous sting impossible to ignore. Melania stood still, her face unreadable, as if she were weighing the gravity of the insult. It wasn't the first time she had been humiliated in public, but this moment felt different. There was no veneer of subtlety, no attempt to disguise the malice behind the question. It was an attack meant to belittle her, to strip her of dignity in front of a crowd that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her reaction. And yet, for all the composure she displayed on the surface, Melania felt something crack deep within her. She had spent years enduring these moments, smiling politely through condescending remarks, brushing off the whispers and sneers that followed her every step. She had learned to let it roll off her back, to rise above it all with quiet grace, but this was different. This wasn't just another jab at her character or her role as First Lady. This was an outright attempt to reduce her entire existence to a cruel stereotype. A trophy wife with no voice, no value beyond her beauty. In that instant, Melania felt the weight of every insult she had ever endured pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about the sacrifices she had made, the relentless scrutiny she had faced simply for being who she was. She thought about the countless women who had been dismissed and disrespected in similar ways, their voices drowned out by those who held power over them. And for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Anger. It wasn't just anger at the journalist or at the media's treatment of her over the years. It was anger at herself, for staying silent, for so long, for allowing others to dictate how she was perceived. She had played their game, kept her head down, and tried to prove her worth through actions rather than words. But now she realized that silence wasn't enough. Silence hadn't protected her from their cruelty. It had only emboldened them to push further. As these thoughts raced through her mind, Melania felt a pang of doubt creep in. Was it even worth fighting back? Could she ever change how people saw her? Or would speaking up only give them more ammunition to tear her down? For a brief moment, despair threatened to consume her. Maybe they were right. Maybe she really was powerless, just another woman trapped in a system designed to keep people like her in their place. But then something shifted. A memory surfaced, one she hadn't thought about in years. She remembered being a young girl in Slovenia, dreaming of a life far beyond the borders of her small town. She remembered how hard she had worked to make those dreams a reality, how many obstacles she had overcome to carve out a place for herself in a world that seemed determined to shut her out. And she remembered one simple truth. She had never let anyone tell her what she could or couldn't be. That realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. She wasn't powerless, not then, not now. The journalist's words were meant to break her, but they had done the opposite. They had reminded her of who she was and what she stood for. She wasn't just a wife or a mother or a former model, a turned First Lady. She was someone who had fought for everything she had achieved, and someone who wouldn't let anyone take that away from her. In that moment of clarity, Melania made a decision that would change everything. She would no longer stay silent in the face of disrespect and injustice. She would speak up, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been underestimated or dismissed because of their gender, their background, or their choices. The tension in the room continued to build as Melania prepared herself for what came next. The journalist still wore his smug expression, clearly believing he had won this round, that his question would go unanswered or brushed aside like so many others before it. But he didn't know what Melania knew now, that silence was no longer an option. The crowd watched intently as Melania finally moved, not with hesitation, but with purpose. Her voice would soon cut through the silence like a blade, delivering words that no one would forget and setting into motion events that would leave everyone stunned, including the man who dared to underestimate her strength one final time. The room was electric with anticipation, the air thick with an unspoken tension. All eyes were on Melania, waiting to see how she would respond. The journalist, still leaning forward with that smug, self-satisfied grin, seemed to believe he had won. He had thrown his jab, and in his mind, it had landed. But what he didn't realize, what no one in that room realized, was that Melania Trump wasn't just standing there silently absorbing the blow. She was calculating. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but sharp, like the edge of a blade. "Embarrassed," she began, her accent giving her words an almost musical quality that only heightened their impact. "No, I am not embarrassed." Her gaze locked on the journalist, her tone unwavering as she continued. "But you should be." The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling through the room as her words sliced through the silence. The journalist's smirk faltered for the briefest of moments, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair as if to signal that he wasn't fazed. Yet Melania wasn't finished, not even close. "You ask if I feel embarrassed because you assume I'm only here because of my husband," she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. "You assume that I have no value beyond what you see on the surface. But let me ask you something. How much do you know about me? About my life? About what I have worked for?" The journalist opened his mouth to respond, but Melania didn't. Give him the chance. She stepped forward slightly, her presence commanding the room in a way that no one could ignore. "You know nothing," she said firmly. "You know nothing about what it means to leave your home and your family behind to chase a dream in a country where you are a stranger. You know nothing about the sacrifices I have made or the challenges I have faced, not just as a woman, but as an immigrant." Her words hit like a tidal wave, crashing over everyone in the room. The journalist's confidence began to waver visibly now, his smug demeanor replaced with something closer to discomfort. But Melania wasn't done yet. "For years," she continued, "I have listened to people like you tell me who I am, what I am. You call me a trophy wife, a puppet, an accessory to my husband's success. And why? Because it is easier for you to tear me down than to acknowledge that I might be more than what you see." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder now, a mix of shock and admiration spreading among them. Even those who had been critical of Melania in the past couldn't deny the power of her words, or the truth behind them. "But let me tell you something," she said, her voice rising slightly as she leaned into her momentum. "I do not need your approval or your validation to know my worth. I have built my life with my own hands, from nothing, and I will not let anyone take that away from me." And then came the moment that no one saw coming, the moment that would turn this confrontation into something far bigger than anyone could have anticipated. "You speak about embarrassment," Melania said, her tone shifting slightly as a faint smile played at the corners of her lips. "But let us talk about embarrassment for a moment. Your embarrassment." The journalist blinked, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in direction. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tinged with defensiveness. Melania tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. "Do you think I do not know who you are?" she asked pointedly. "Do you think I do not know about your past?" The room fell silent again as everyone waited for her to explain. The journalist looked visibly uneasy now, his earlier confidence all but gone. "I have done my research," Melania said simply. Unlike you, I do not speak without knowing the facts. She paused for a moment before continuing, letting the weight of her words sink in. And what I know is this. You have spent your career tearing people down, spreading lies and half-truths to make yourself look important. The journalist's face turned red as he stammered out a response, but Melania cut him off effortlessly. You think you can humiliate me? She asked rhetorically. You think you can reduce me to nothing with your words? No. Her voice grew colder now, each word landing like a hammer blow. The only person being reduced here is you. The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps as Melania delivered her final blow, a revelation so shocking that it left everyone reeling. You speak of embarrassment, she said one last time, her voice dripping with quiet triumph. But perhaps it is time for you to look in the mirror and ask yourself, who should truly be embarrassed here? The journalist sat frozen in his chair now, his earlier bravado completely shattered. He had walked into this confrontation believing he held all the power, but now it was clear that power had shifted entirely into Melania's hands. As she stepped back and allowed silence to settle over the room once more, one thing became abundantly clear. This wasn't just a victory for Melania Trump. It was a reckoning for everyone who had ever underestimated her strength or dismissed her worth, and for the journalist who had dared to challenge her. His control over the narrative was gone, and it wasn't coming back anytime soon. The aftermath of Melania's words was nothing short of seismic. The journalist, who had entered the room with an air of superiority, now sat slumped in his chair, his face pale and his confidence shattered. The crowd, initially stunned into silence, began to murmur with a mixture of awe and approval. Some exchanged glances, others whispered to one another, but all were united by the same thought. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. For the journalist, however, the fallout was only beginning. Within hours, clips of the exchange flooded social media. The video of Melania's calm yet devastating takedown spread like wildfire, garnering millions of views and sparking heated debates across platforms. People from all walks of life weighed in, some applauding her courage and composure, others criticizing the journalist for his blatant disrespect. The tide of public opinion was swift and merciless, and it didn't take long for the journalist's name to become synonymous with arrogance and unprofessionalism. As more details about his career surfaced, a pattern began to emerge. Stories from former colleagues painted a picture of a man who had built his reputation on sensationalism and controversy, often at the expense of others. His past articles were dissected and scrutinized, revealing a troubling history of bias and unethical practices. What had once been carefully buried beneath the surface was now exposed for all to see. The network he worked for quickly found itself under fire as, sponsors began pulling their advertisements, citing concerns over the journalist's conduct and the broader implications for their brand image. Viewers threatened to boycott unless action was taken. Faced with mounting pressure, the network issued a public apology and announced that the journalist had been suspended indefinitely pending an internal investigation. For Melania, the days that followed were a whirlwind of media attention, but this time, it wasn't her clothing or her accent that dominated headlines. It was her words. Articles praised her for standing up not only for herself, but for women everywhere who had faced similar treatment. Commentators lauded her ability to remain composed under pressure while delivering a message that resonated far beyond the confines of that room. Yet Melania herself remained largely silent in the wake of the incident. She declined interview requests and refrained from issuing any further statements. When asked why she hadn't capitalized on the moment to further her public image or agenda, those close to her offered a simple explanation. She didn't need to. Her actions had spoken louder than any press release or soundbite ever could. Behind closed doors, however, Melania allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about everything that had led up to this point, the years of scrutiny, the countless moments when she had chosen silence over confrontation, and she realized something profound. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about challenging a culture that thrived on tearing people down rather than lifting them up. In private conversations with friends and advisors, she expressed hope that her experience might serve as a turning point, not just for herself, but for others who had faced similar challenges. She spoke about the importance of dignity and respect in public discourse, and emphasized that true strength often lies in knowing when to speak up and when to let actions speak for themselves. As weeks turned into months, the incident began to fade from headlines, but its impact lingered. The journalist's career never fully recovered. Though he eventually returned to work in a diminished capacity, his credibility was irreparably damaged. Meanwhile, Melania continued her advocacy work with renewed purpose, using her platform to highlight issues close to her heart while remaining steadfastly true to herself. In time, people came to see that moment not as an isolated incident but as part of a larger narrative, a story about resilience in the face of adversity and the power of standing up for what is right. For Melania Trump, it wasn't about revenge or retribution. It was about reclaiming her voice and reminding the world that no one, not even those who wield power through words, has the right to define another person's worth. And so she moved forward, not as a victim or even as a victor, but as someone who had faced injustice head-on and emerged stronger for it. Her story became a source of inspiration for many, a reminder that dignity cannot be taken away by others. It can only be surrendered willingly. In the end, justice wasn't just served, it was redefined. It wasn't about bringing someone down, it was about rising above them with grace and integrity intact. And as Melania quietly walked away from that chapter of her life, she carried with her something far greater than vindication. The unshakable knowledge that she had stood tall when it mattered most, and in doing so, had changed more than just one room's perception of her. She had shifted an entire narrative.